Good evening, everyone. There is so much information we need to go over tonight because Bryan Kohberger was finally transported from Pennsylvania to Idaho. And now today, as I'm filming this video, he had his first court appearance in Idaho, which means that the affidavit was finally released. The affidavit that details how he was arrested, why he was arrested, what information they have to arrest him. And let me tell you, it is wild. If you haven't read it yet, it is 19 pages long. And there was so much information, I was shocked. So much information that contradicts what we all thought and knew. Your mind will be blown. My mind is blown. Before I get into the affidavit, I just wanted to say I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot of this because, again, it is 19 pages long. We'll be here all night if I read the affidavit word for word. But I wanted to point out all of the information that is either new, that shocked me, that confirmed things. So that's what we're going to be chatting about. But I do recommend reading it yourself word for word, the affidavit, because it is very interesting. So I'll have it linked down below. Let's get into this affidavit. So this affidavit is written by Brett Payne, who is a Moscow police officer. According to Officer Payne, he arrived to process the scene, and this is where we get the confirmation that Xana and Ethan were both found deceased in Xana's bedroom on the second floor. Payne writes, and I quote, "Officer Smith directed me down the hallway to the west bedroom on the second floor, which I later learned through Xana's driver's license and other personal belongings found in the room was Xana Kernodle's. As I approached the room, I could see a body, later identified as Xana's, laying on the floor." So there we have confirmation that Xana was not found in bed, but she was actually found on her bedroom floor. Xana also had wounds which appeared to be caused by an edged weapon. Ethan was also found in the room. It doesn't state if he was also found on the floor or in the bed, but he also had wounds caused by sharp force injuries. On the third floor, officers found both Kaylee and Maddie deceased in a single bed inside of Maddie's bedroom. They both had visible stab wounds. Officer Payne would then notice a tan leather knife sheath, which was on the bed next to Maddie's right side. The sheath would later be processed and had a KA-BAR and a USMC, as well as the United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and Anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. So this is where we get that KA-BAR style knife that was, promoted through the media. It's because they found the knife sheath on the bed. But it gets better, because this is where the Idaho State Labs would later locate a single source of DNA that was left on the button snap on the knife's sheath. This is how they got Bryan's DNA. We also learned enough confirmation that Bethany's bedroom was on the first floor. We then get into the timeline that was gathered after law enforcement interviewed both Bethany and Dylan. On November 12th, Bethany witnessed both Xana and Ethan at the Sigma Chi fraternity party at approximately between 9 p.m. and 1:45. Around 1:45 a.m., now on the 13th, is when Xana and Ethan ended up walking the short distance home. And I wanted to note this information because there were a lot of people questioning and a lot of news sources questioning what Ethan and Xana were doing that night between those time frames, because there was so much surveillance footage of Maddie and Kaylee, at the bar and then at that food truck, but everyone was questioning what Ethan and Xana were doing. Well, now we have confirmation that it seems that Bethany was with Xana and Ethan that night at the Sigma Chi fraternity party. That's all they did that night. Then we have both Bethany and Dylan making statements that everybody was home by 2 a.m. that night and were either asleep or in their bedrooms by about 4 a.m. We then have that Xana received a DoorDash order at 4 a.m., which I think is very interesting. Police ended up confirming with the DoorDash driver that he did in fact deliver the food around 4 a.m. Very interesting in my opinion that Xana had food delivered right before the murders happened. We then learn some very shocking information. Dylan's bedroom isn't actually on the first floor like we were all led to believe this entire time. Dylan's bedroom is actually on the second floor with Xana's bedroom. Knowing this information now just completely obliterates the theory that Bethany and Dylan were asleep during the murders on the first floor and that they didn't wake up during the murders because there was some kind of sound barrier being on the first floor. That blew my mind when I read that. This means that police lied to all of us and told us that Dylan and Bethany were sleeping, but we will find out that they have a good reason for it. This is where things get wild, in my opinion, and extremely scary. So if you're standing up watching this right now, I recommend sitting down. In the affidavit, it states that Dylan says she woke up around 4 a.m., around that time when Xana should be receiving her DoorDash. Dylan says that she woke up because she heard what sounded like Kaylee playing with Murphy on the third floor. Kaylee's dog. A short time later, Dylan heard who she possibly thought was Kaylee say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." But according to law enforcement, after doing a forensic download of Xana's cell phone, it turns out that Xana's activity on her phone showed that she was actually still awake on TikTok around 4:12 a.m., which also would make sense that Xana was still awake because she would have had food delivered only 12 minutes earlier. So she was probably, eating her food, scrolling on TikTok. But Dylan heard someone say that someone was in the home. So who said that then? Possibly Xana? This also means that when the murders took place, Xana was awake. Unlike what we all also thought, that everyone was asleep around 4 a.m. when the murders took place, this means that Xana was awake and so was Dylan, which is also even more terrifying in my opinion. So when Dylan ended up hearing someone in the house say, "Someone's here," she ended up opening up her bedroom door and looking out into the hallway, and I think she has a view of the kitchen from her bedroom as well, but she ended up not seeing anything. So then she closed her door, and I'm assuming she tried to go back to sleep. Dylan would then get up and open her bedroom door a second time after she heard crying coming from Xana's room. From there, she then heard a male voice saying something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." So let's take a minute to discuss this. I've seen a lot of people assuming that this male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," was Bryan Kohberger's. But I don't see that happening. I'm not going to discount a killer, murdering someone being like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." But that seems like something that psychotic that's having delusions would say, maybe having some kind of delusion that they're helping the person by murdering them. Now, I don't think that's Bryan Kohberger. I'm pretty sure today in his court appearance, he waived all his mental health things, saying that he's sane. And no one in his life has said that, he had delusions or anything like that. He seems to be very smart if he's getting PhDs, going to college, has all of these degrees in different fields. So in my opinion, I don't think this sentence was said by Bryan Kohberger. In my opinion, what makes more sense is that if Bryan had went in and stabbed both Xana and Ethan at this point in time, and then possibly had moved on to Maddie and Kaylee, that they were still alive to some capacity after he stabbed them. And so Xana was crying because she's in pain. And so Ethan is trying to console her and possibly trying to, help his girlfriend. So he's saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," even though he's also dying, which is just, it gives me the shivers, and it just breaks my heart thinking about it. Just putting myself in their shoes, thinking about your loved one dying, this person that you want to eventually marry, that you love, you're watching them die in front of your eyes and you're trying to console them. It's too much. That, in my opinion, though, makes more sense than Bryan Kohberger saying that sentence. Let's jump back into the timeline, though. Approximately 4:17 a.m., just 3 minutes after Xana was on TikTok, a security camera located at 1112 King Road, which is just 50 feet from the west wall of Xana's bedroom, picked up distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper followed by a loud thud. A dog could also be heard barking numerous times on this audio starting around 4:17 a.m., which leads me once again to theorize that Bryan came into the home, allegedly. I need to say allegedly in this because he's still innocent until proven guilty. But Bryan went into the home, allegedly, attacked Xana and Ethan first, and then moved on to Maddie and Kaylee around 4:17 a.m., and that's why we hear Murphy barking, if it is Murphy in this, surveillance footage barking. I think this also could answer our questions of if, Murphy barked. And clearly, if this audio is being picked up coming from the direction of 1122 King Road, Murphy was barking. But then that also leads us down the spiral of questions with Dylan, which we will talk about that in a moment. Clearly, this home wasn't silent when the murders took place like we all were questioning. The dog was barking. There was crying. There was people speaking in the home. There was noise. And now we learn that one of the roommates wasn't even on the first floor. But things will get even wilder in this affidavit, because Dylan would open her door for a third time after she heard that crying. And when she opened her door for the third time, she would see the killer. Dylan recounts in the affidavit seeing a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose. She described the figure as a male standing around 5'10" or taller, not very muscular, but athletically built, with bushy eyebrows. Bushy eyebrows are very important. And this man, she states, was walking towards her. Now, I did see someone going into the floor plan of the home, and this person went to Dylan's doorway and spun around, and when you look straight ahead, it's the kitchen. So this person was speculating that either the killer, aka Bryan, allegedly, was walking either down the staircase, which was right next to her bedroom, and walked out the door because this killer, the figure, was walking towards the sliding door to leave. that that's why the killer didn't see Dylan peeking out the doorway, or the killer was walking from Xana and Ethan's room through the living room, I think it is, towards the door and possibly didn't see her. That, or he didn't want to kill her. Getting back to Dylan's recount, she says that she's seen this man and she was standing there and she was frozen in shock. But this man didn't attack her. Instead, he walked directly past her and towards the sliding glass doors. Dylan then states that she locked herself in her bedroom. And then we get no information after that. We don't get any information on what happened between her locking her bedroom door and that 911 call being placed at 11:58 a.m., which is leading to even more speculation now. So let's chat about that a little bit, this missing time frame. The public has been led to believe this entire time that the murders took place sometime between 3 and 5 a.m.-ish, and Dylan and Bethany slept through the entire thing. Dylan and Bethany then woke up sometime before noon, and then the 911 call was placed around 11:58 a.m. We then have the report of an unconscious person. None of this is still making sense. This affidavit answered none of that. But we now have knowledge that Dylan was actually not asleep when the murders took place. She actually wasn't asleep on the first floor. She lived in the second floor, and she actually also witnessed the killer inside of the home. So again, I am not victim blaming whatsoever, but I think it is valid for us to ask questions. And again, as I said, people have been victim blaming way too much in this case, been speculating on all the wrong people way too hard, too much. And I didn't bring this up in my last video, and I regretted not doing it because I watched it back and I'm like, why didn't I say this? From the beginning of me covering this case, I said I wasn't going to speculate on, a specific person being responsible in this case. I've seen way too many people singling out the boyfriends in this case of Maddie and Kaylee, who literally lost the loves of their lives. I also see people speculating if the roommates were involved and if there were fraternity boys involved, just all of these speculations on who could have been involved. These young adults were grieving the loss of their loved ones and their best friends, and people were going around on the internet blaming them for their murder. People's names were dragged through the mud online, and they're not even involved. At this point in time, law enforcement has not said a word about these people. So that's not what I'm trying to do here when I bring up this timeline not making sense and the actions of some of these people not making sense. Because honestly, there's so much information in this case that we do not know. This affidavit just gave us a little peek behind the curtain. So the police probably have so much more information on this time frame and this point in time that we're all confused about that they just haven't released, and they possibly aren't releasing it because it's very vital information that they probably want to take to court or whatever. I don't know. But what I really want to know, and I hope comes out eventually, is what happened between 4 a.m. when Dylan witnessed a killer in the home and then she locked herself in a room, and 8 hours later when the 911 call was placed. Why did it take 8 hours for a 911 call to be made? Now, I do understand Dylan locking her bedroom door because she's in shock and she's in fear and she's terrified of what's going on, and she's, frozen in fear and hiding in her bedroom, and she doesn't want to come out of her bedroom because she thinks the killer's still in the house. That's totally understandable. So when she's seen this strange man in the house and she heard crying and screaming, the dog barking, all this stuff happening in the home, she admits that she's, frozen in fear. She was in shock. Why didn't she call 911 after she locked the bedroom door? That's the question that we all have. I think it's understandable that Bryan would be covered in blood after all of this murder he just committed, but he was wearing all black, so I think we can kind of rule that out, that possibly if he was covered in blood, she didn't notice it because it was dark in the house. He's wearing black, so you wouldn't maybe see the blood. On top of that, we also have to remember that there was talk of other people being at the home when the 911 call was made. So if you've seen someone in the home at 4 a.m. and you heard all this happening, why 8 hours later are people being called over to the home before the 911 call is even placed? I'm so confused about this block in time, and I know everyone else is as well. I know I'm not the only one. And I'm not saying that Dylan's to blame in anything, but I'm just very confused, as everyone else is right now with the information that we have, because it just made things even more confusing and look even worse, in my opinion, towards the roommates at this point now. So I'm kind of wishing they released a little bit more information on this, because it's making everyone look at Dylan. And I wish it didn't, because I don't think she's to blame. I just think we don't have the information that supports why this happened. It's really hard because there's 8 hours between those two things happening. I don't know. There's just so many things that are still missing in this time frame, in my opinion. It's a mess. And this part, it's a mess. And I want to hear the 911 call so badly. I want to know what was said, who made the 911 call. Like, that is something that I think would help piece more things together for us all. But I feel like they're holding that back right now because it probably is something very important to the case. They probably want to take that part to trial. You know, police aren't going to give more than they need to at this point, because all this affidavit needed to explain is why they arrested Bryan Kohberger, what information they had that led to his arrest. They don't need to put all of the other stuff in that they don't want to release right now. So there's definitely so much more that they know that they're just not letting us know. So back to this timeline. Law enforcement determined that the murders happened between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. So let's talk about some of this evidence that was collected. On top of the Kabar knife, the sheath that ended up being found, there was also a shoe print that was found outside of Dylan's door that had a diamond print on it that law enforcement says is similar to a Vans type shoe. This is also consistent with Dylan's story that the killer ended up walking by her bedroom door. Video canvassing was also done in the area, and law enforcement obtained footage in the early morning hours around November 13th, and that showed a white sedan traveling westbound between 3:26 a.m. and 3:28 a.m. This white sedan then made 3 other passes by 1122 King Road in this time frame, meaning the killer was scouting out the area before committing the murders. The white sedan then entered the area a 4th time around 4:04 a.m. right when the murders are thought to have taken place. The white sedan is then seen departing around 4:20 a.m. It then drives to Pullman, Washington. Okay, so let me pull this timeline all fully together for you now. So Xana's DoorDash is dropped off around 4 a.m. The white sedan, aka Bryan Kohberger allegedly, is pulling up to 1122 King Road around 4:04 a.m., just 4 minutes after the DoorDash is dropped off. But then Xana's TikTok pings around 4:12 a.m. A dog is then heard barking, who we think is Murphy, and then cries are also heard around 4:17 a.m. on that surveillance footage. So it's only 5 minutes after Xana's TikTok ping that we have the dog barking. You know, the white sedan is then seen leaving around 4:20 a.m. That is a tight timeline. That is fast. He was in and out of that home. We also know Pullman is about a 15-minute drive away from Washington State University, around where Bryan Kohberger was living. And this white sedan that would turn out to be Bryan Kohberger's was seen around Washington State University in Pullman, Washington around 2:44 a.m. Bryan's white sedan was then seen again at 2:53 a.m. traveling southeast towards Moscow again. Around 5:25 a.m., the white sedan was then observed on 5 separate cameras located in Pullman and WSU campus. It then appeared again at 5:27 a.m. So Bryan, which we'll find out it is Bryan, was just driving all over the place after the murders. He was like, I don't know if he was agitated or he was like high off the murders. He just like couldn't sit still. He was driving around. On November 29th, Washington State University police officer Daniel Tiengo went through the white Elantras registered at WSU. And this officer ended up coming across a 2015 white Elantra with Pennsylvania license plates. And this vehicle was registered to none other than Bryan Kohberger. And Bryan's apartment just, happens to be in the area that white Elantra ended up stopping the night that the police followed the surveillance. So essentially, after this cop ended up finding that the school had a white Elantra registered to a student there that matched all the information that they needed, they figured out it was Bryan driving around that whole night, that was going to Moscow, coming back, doing all this stuff around the time of the murders. That also means that law enforcement had Bryan Kohberger on their radar on the 29th of November. Police then ended up pulling up Bryan Kohberger's license photo, and when they looked at the photo on his license, they realized that his physical description pretty much matched the exact description that Dylan had gave of the killer that night. Further investigation also determined that Bryan had pretty frequently been pulled over by police officers. Bryan was actually pulled over on August 21st of 2022, and after reviewing the body cam footage from the stop, police ended up obtaining his phone number from that body cam footage. Bryan was also pulled over on October 14th of 2022. Okay, so now this I found even more interesting. It turns out that Bryan had actually applied for an internship at the Pullman Police Department in fall of 2022. He wrote an essay that he was interested in assisting rural law enforcement agencies with how they could better collect and analyze technological data in public safety operations. This man was not only going online, trying to research how to be a better killer by asking other criminals their experiences on the internet, but he was also trying to infiltrate the police department. Wild to me and sick. Police also ended up determining, though, that after running Bryan's cell phone number, it did not ping in the area of 1122 King Road between 3 to 5 a.m. However, they did determine that at 2:42 a.m., his phone pinged near his apartment. At 4:27 a.m., his phone pinged traveling through Pullman and was consistent with the travel path of the white Elantra that the surveillance footage showed that night. But after 2:47 a.m., the phone just stops pinging all of a sudden, and it's assumed that the phone was turned off. Now, why would Bryan turn off his phone while he was driving, towards Moscow? His phone just coincidentally wouldn't turn back on until 2 hours later at 4:48 a.m. when it pinged again on Highway 95 south of Moscow, heading back towards Pullman. Between 4:50 a.m. and 5:26 a.m., it follows the exact same path that law enforcement found of that white Elantra and all the surveillance footage. And then at 5:30 a.m., Bryan's phone pings back at his apartment. A little too coincidental, ain't it? On top of that, this is also really spooky, is that Bryan's phone pings and surveillance footage would also show him traveling back to Moscow at 9 a.m. And his phone would end up pinging this time around 1122 King Road between 9:12 a.m. and 9:21 a.m., meaning he returned to the crime scene. Now, I've seen a lot of people speculating that Bryan returned to the crime scene because he had remembered that he had forgotten that knife sheath at the home, so he was going to go back to try to get the sheath back. But I think that is stupid, in my opinion. Like, I'm not saying people are stupid for thinking that. I'm saying that I think he's a little too smart for that. I don't think hours after he committed these murders, he would go back to the crime scene and attempt to get this knife sheath back. It doesn't make sense to me. It's too risky. I do, however, think that murderers love to go back to the crime scene. And I think he went back to the crime scene to see if police have been called yet. I think he went back to see what was happening there. I think he wanted to see the police were there, and he wanted to watch everyone stress and be upset and everyone be distraught over what he had just done. He wanted the attention, and he wanted to see the pain that he caused. He wanted to see his own live horror show unfold. But nothing was happening at 9 a.m. Everything would have been quiet there still, because as we know, the 911 call wasn't placed until 11:58 a.m. So he would have shown up, and it would have been quiet there still. Now we go into the question of the stalker. And it seems like this whole stalker theory may actually be true, because law enforcement ended up looking into Bryan's cell phone pings even farther back because they were curious if he had stalked the victims. And it seems like he actually did. On December 23rd, law enforcement received more extensive phone records of Bryan's phone and realized that Bryan's phone had pinged in the area covering 1122 King Road 12 times before the murders took place. 12 times. And 11 of those times happened in the middle of the night, leading me to think that he was indeed stalking them, and he was watching them in the middle of the night when he wanted to commit those murders to see what time everyone went to bed, what time everyone showed up at the home, who was around the home at this time of night, were people going in and out still at this time of night, when did all the lights turn off, what was happening at this time of night when he wanted to commit the murders, so that he could plan, the best time frame to go in. And clearly he went there 12 times, and in my opinion, he ended up finding the best time to attack them because he was in and out of there in the matter of less than 20 minutes. In my opinion, he was planning this murder for a long time. We also know during the end of December, Bryan and his father ended up driving from Washington State back to Pennsylvania, and the FBI admitted that they were actively tracking Bryan on this trip. The FBI also told police officers in Indiana to pull Bryan and his father over, I don't know, to get surveillance footage of him. I'm not sure why they decided to pull him over. I guess maybe to just check in on him to see what's up. But there is video surveillance footage from the police body cam that has been released, and Bryan looks scared in it, honestly. It's like a brief frame that we get to see his face, but when the cop walks up to the car, he looks a little shocked, in my opinion. Honestly, he was probably also really confused why he was getting pulled over so many times. But I think that's pretty damn sneaky on behalf of the FBI, if you ask me. They were not only playing Bryan Kohberger, but they were playing all of us. On December 27th of 2022, when Bryan was finally back in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania FBI agents ended up pulling trash from Bryan's parents' home garbage that was out on the side of the road, and they pulled garbage from the Kohberger's garbage can so that they could collect DNA from it to test it against the DNA that they found on that knife sheath. And when they ended up comparing the DNA on the sheath to the garbage that they found in the trash, they ended up matching it. And there's a lot of big words that happen and when they're explaining this in the affidavit, but essentially they connected the DNA on the sheath to Bryan's father's DNA. So it was like a familial match. So that's the affidavit. That is how Bryan Kohberger was caught. They found the sheath that had DNA on it. They ended up seeing the white car in all the surveillance. They connected the white car to a car at Washington State University. They looked at Bryan's photo, realized that it matched the description, and then they essentially found his phone number, ran the pings of his phone and connected it to the exact path of the car, and then realized it was Bryan. And then they tested his DNA against the DNA on the sheath. Closed case, in my opinion. I think they have a good case here. But let me know how you feel about that. In my opinion, that's all pretty damning. I also, once again, I just want to say it for like the last time. I think it's crazy that the police and the FBI played all of us. They had us all thinking that this case was going to go cold, yet they knew within 16 days of the murder, Bryan Kohberger did it. They couldn't prove it at that point, but they knew they had a suspect, yet they were not announcing that shit. They had us all thinking that this was going to be a cold case. Meanwhile, they had the killer 16 days in. And I think I want to do a video of how Bryan has possibly inserted himself in the investigation during this whole investigation time frame, where everyone didn't know there was anyone, even a suspect. Let me know if you want me to do a video on that, because I think there's a lot more evidence, even more evidence now to support that theory than there was before. But let me know. On top of that, I do think that the FBI and police lied to us saying that Dylan and Bethany slept through the murders because they were trying to protect Dylan, because Bryan might not have known that Dylan had seen him that night. And if that information was released, that means Dylan would have been in danger. So I do think it was a very responsible decision on their part to lie to everyone and say that they were actually asleep when the murders happened. But what I want to know is how you all feel about all of this new information. I am mind blown. I was reading it at work, just like the brief breakdown of what was happening, and I was losing it. I was literally losing it. One of my coworkers is interested in this case too, so I was chatting with her about it. But when I got home and like actually properly read through the 19 pages of the affidavit, mind blown. But yeah, that is the affidavit. If you want to continue to stay updated on this case and chat with me about this case, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you're notified when I do post more videos regarding the Moscow, Idaho murders. Subscribing also does help me to continue to create content like this, continue the conversation about cases like this, and will also allow me to continue to spend more time creating videos. With that, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye, guys.